I'm Fallon from Capital. I'm a Senior Community Relationship Manager here, and today I have Sarah Price from the Altogether Group to explain what embedded networks are.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Fallon. I get really excited about embedded networks. I can talk about embedded networks for ages, but I'm going to try to keep it nice and concise for your owners. Essentially, a lot of them will be exemption holders, and the importance that's really important from a legislative perspective. So essentially, in the market, what we have is authorised retailers, and we have those that can sell energy under the retail law. And then we have bodies corporate who aren't necessarily going to go through an approval process with the regulator, and they have like a quasi approval by the Australian Energy Regulator to on-sell energy to the embedded network customers or to the electricity customers within a building. So they have a unique position in that they are responsible for all of those consumer protections that are associated to selling energy, to selling an essential service to clients, and it's very much evolved over time. So embedded networks were introduced, right back in the 40s and 50s, and they've been very much not dissimilar to body corporate levies and those being recovered, in that they were just another levy that was recovered in the olden days, and essentially, the body corporate would buy in bulk, and they would sell the energy to the customers at a reduced rate because they received that reduced rate for the energy that they purchased in bulk, and it wasn't really deemed that somebody in that position would be not offering a high level of consumer protection to their customers, because essentially the idea was that that was them. They were selling energy to themselves. Yeah. Over time, what we're seeing in a changing development landscape is that we've got a lot of new development coming in. A lot of those are tenanted. A lot of those, we have overseas owners who might not necessarily ever live in the country. And so we've recognised that as that development has expanded over time, regulations needed to be introduced to the sector to keep up with the demand and the changing landscape of the embedded network environment. While there wasn't a great deal of change right up until recently, there was a great deal of change. For about 2017, really, we saw first of all, the introduction of the power of choice, which allowed customers to, which legislatively or regulatory allowed customers to opt out of an embedded network. Yes. That wasn't able to be done before, except at a huge expense, with wiring and all the rest of it. But what it meant was that, part of the power of choice and the metering standards that were upgraded in 2017 allowed customers to, or allowed metering providers to install meters that would allow customers to move in and out of an embedded network with that two-way communication available to those meters. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a mandate of those meters. Yep. So that offering or that ability to opt in and out of embedded networks isn't really possible in a lot of instances, and it still requires a heavy infrastructure load to be able to do that. But the time will come, and like we were saying, we were just in a meeting earlier, Queenslanders do take a little bit longer to have that uptake, but eventually I think that there will be a lot of benefit to, and we most certainly support all of the buildings that we retail to. We upgrade the metering so that eventually the customers will be able to enjoy that freedom to move in and out of the embedded network, because fundamentally where we sit is that if we're not providing our customers with the best rate that we possibly can, there's really something wrong, and we probably need to go back and have a look at our model and how we've come up with the rate that we have to charge the customer. And so we're always challenging ourselves on that as well.
What can an owner or a tenant in an embedded network do if they want a different rate? What's the process?
Look, 100%. What I would say, and probably what we haven't been doing enough of, there's been a big campaign on the outside of embedded networks for the big switch. But what we haven't really been looking at is within our embedded networks, are we charging correctly? You know, do our commercial models stand up? And what I would say is that even if you're not a third party supplier, even if you're not a retailer, you know, customers should still be able to approach their committees and request information about how the charging structure has been derived. And that's most certainly, this actually brings us to a really good topic actually, Fallon, because as of the 28th of February, so very, very newly, all of our bodies corporate are deemed now, or everybody under 2,000 lots is deemed to be part of the Ombudsman scheme. And what that will allow is consumers to be able to call the Ombudsman and say that they have a concern about their rate. Now, the Ombudsman, in the first instance, will say to go back to their provider and ask, you know, for that to be investigated. Now, at Altogether Solutions, we provide an agency model. We call it the agency model. It just means that we're supporting, we're acting as an agent on behalf of the body corporate. We also are an authorised retailer, so we can offer a third-party solution as well. But under the agency model, essentially what we would do for anybody who calls us is that we will, you know, absolutely go bananas on that inquiry and thoroughly go through how we got to the customer making the inquiry to the Ombudsman, how we got to the point that they felt that they couldn't go through our dispute resolution process first. Or are they just one of those people that calls the Ombudsman?
Yep.
Who knows? But anyway, there are those that we have, and there are the people who genuinely have a complaint to be fielded, and we treat them all the same way. So everybody that comes to us then says, listen, I'm going to approach the Ombudsman, we go into DEFCON 4 and we just, you know, and we look into how we can best negotiate the rate. Now, that comes back in the agency model, where we're working on behalf of the committee, that comes back to a conversation with the committee around, what do you want to do with this client that's asking for a decreased rate? And I can, you know, most committees would say, well, if we decrease the rate for that person, we've got to decrease the rate for everybody. And actually, you know, legislatively they do it as well. So that can affect their model. That can affect what surplus they're currently deriving. It can affect a whole bunch of things that the committee have made decisions on previously. But it has to be addressed now, where it probably has never come up before. I think in my history I've had one or two. Like literally two people ask for a reduced rate, and usually that's because they're in financial hardship. You know, it's usually coming from a really genuine place that they can't pay their bill. You know, so we've had to negotiate something, but it really doesn't happen as a practice, and it should. And you know, at Altogether, we perform performance reports for our clients, but we also perform those performance reports for ourselves, and so we understand, you know, for our retail clients, whether we're charging them according to a fair model, you know, because when we move into a customer, we're moving into a building, there's a lot of guesswork on, you know, whether it's a commercially viable project for us. But after a time, and that's usually about a year, you know, we see the full cycle of a year. After about a year, we can see whether we're making enough money to recover our capital expenditure and our operating costs and all the expenditure, the gate meter costs, and any regulatory requirements that we have to adhere to, and all of those things. So we get to see that, but we also have the benefit, I suppose, of knowing what that looks like over buildings of all different shapes and sizes, whereas a committee really only knows what their building does and how their building behaves.
Sarah, is there any minimum requirement for an embedded network, like a certain amount of lots, too many lots, not enough?
So customers normally get the best savings around that 50 lot mark. Anything under that, you know, you're sort of starting to creep back up to rates that you can typically achieve in the market anyway. But it can be very specific to each building. So depending on the other infrastructure that you've got in the building, depending on the efficiency of the common area space, there's a lot of things that come into play. But yeah, I would say around the 50 mark is where you can still receive or still achieve reasonable savings for your consumers.
Can you also just touch on EVs?
EVs, the hot topic at the moment. Okay, so there's a bit of a process with EVs. So essentially, we're seeing a lot of new development come in with at least a few EVs on the plan, and they're being snapped up really quite quickly, whether people have EVs or not yet. They're planning to get EVs. And I think that's probably the crux of it. So individuals are planning on their EV, on obtaining an EV or buying an EV in the future. And I think it's no different for Bodies Corporate. So I think all I would suggest to Bodies Corporate at the moment is to have the conversation around how they're going to plan to eventually service EV car holders or EV holders. The place to start is you just want to understand from a capacity level whether your building has enough capacity to host EVs, and whether that's a shared service or individual units. And then, so once you understand what the cost is, and the term you might hear used is backboning. So when you're backboning a building, it just means, you know, you're running cabling and wires to a distribution point that customers can reach for their EV charger. So essentially, the cost of that far outweighs the cost of just being able to plug into any GPO, right? But you've got to get that piece right, and you've got to understand whether and how many EVs can be charged at any one time, or how you're going to manage multiple EV car users at any one time. So there's a great deal of work involved in it, but fundamentally where you want to start, and there's plenty of reputable suppliers that we can put you in touch with, but you want to understand the capacity of your building and what it's going to cost today to backbone your building.
Yeah.
So then I would sort of say the next step is to sort of, you know, if you're still just dabbling, maybe one person's got an EV car or two, or somebody's thinking about it or whatever, it's still not really cost effective to backbone a whole building for one or two cars. So
That's
I would
right.
say just, you know, for want of a better expression, just you kind of have to muddle through. We're calling that stage one. So if you're allowing them, and there should be in place also
dribs and drabs at the moment.
Yeah, just dribs and drabs. If you have the capacity just to allow them to trickle charge overnight, then that shouldn't cause too much of an issue to most buildings. But in saying that, touch wood, in some buildings that could be quite detrimental. So you don't want to be there needs to be an approval process. So the first step really is to understand your capacity. Can your building handle even the trickle charge overnight? The second step really is to start looking at future proofing. So, you know, you may not have reasonable, you might have reasonable capacity, but it's going to cost you to get to a position where you can actually service these cars. So I would look, and what I would suggest to Bodies Corporate at the moment is just start planning for that. You know, just put in introduce a small levy, so that in the sinking fund, so that in 3 years you have the capacity to backbone the building, and then, you know, third-party suppliers may also do that for you, you know, over a long-term contract, and amortise their costs over a long-term contract. But just don't get caught in 3 years or 5 years when this is really going to take off. And again, there is the argument that not everybody is going to have an EV car. There is going to be a greater, you know, there are more technologies coming out in terms of vehicle, you know, into the vehicles that will drive into the future. But at the moment, I don't think we can bury our heads in the sand. You know, people are not going to necessarily, and shouldn't have to, go down to their local, you know, Woolworths and plug in and go shopping for an hour. If they should be allowed to, there should be the capacity for them to be able to charge their car in their home overnight. You know, so I think it's just something we don't bury our heads in the sand with. I don't think that there's, and we definitely haven't seen the uptake in Queensland at all. We have in New South Wales. Different states behave very, very differently as well.
Sarah, are you happy to attend committee meetings or general meetings with us to be able to provide our clients with a bit more information, explain any questions that they've got?
Yeah, look, 100%. Actually, I think that there's a really important time right now to have an industry expert attend those meetings and communicate with the whole committee as well as the building manager. Really, really important. You know, central pivotal people that are those points of contact that aren't necessarily their body corporate manager. I think that when it comes to the specifics of a building, those people know their building more than anybody. They know why they've made a decision, and it's really important for them to temper their decision making with the rules. you know, with what they can and can't do, what the future holds, what the planning requirements are. So 100%, it's, you know, generally we go to a meeting and it takes 15 minutes, although I do like to have a little chat, so, you know, beware, but only to those that like to chat back to me. So most certainly we're happy to have, you know, informal meetings with the committee, because sometimes it does take that break away from the committee meeting as well. So we're happy to meet with the interested parties if there's an energy subcommittee or whatever, because we've reached a really pivotal point in the embedded network reform, and I think that it's really important now that committees, especially who are operating on behalf of all owners, really understand the obligation that they have to the consumers that they're serving in their buildings.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, thanks so much for your time today, Sarah. If you are interested or have queries regarding your buildings, you can always talk to your community relationship manager here at Capital, and if you'd like a quote from the Altogether Group, we can put you in contact with Sarah.
Thanks a million.
No worries, thanks Sarah.